Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, yes, continuing our focus on the economy. We're joined this morning by Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, the Minister of Finance. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Morning.
Well, let's start off with what many saw in your ministry, that protest. We didn't know where it came from, but all of a sudden it was blocked, but eventually it was sorted. What exactly happened?
Well, I think Monday and Tuesday the staff gathered. They had a number of grievances, some of which were administrative, some of which were a little bit more fundamental. The administrative ones related to things like their 2013 and 2014 overtime, which they said had been delayed in release. And this is, overtime that they are entitled to. So when Monday I wasn't in Abuja, so Tuesday we got back and we began to engage. And my position was that really they needed to open the office before we could talk, because I think that actually stopping people from going into the office is improper. And so we needed to actually be inside the office so that we could engage. So I think on Wednesday morning we agreed that that's what would happen, and I turned up. So we got into the office and began to engage, and they had a number of grievances, but among them was this issue of 2013, 2014 overtime, which they're entitled to and which had been delayed, and that's an administrative issue. And the Director of Finance and Admin addressed that. But more fundamental was this issue of what is called the special overtime allowance. Yeah. That's the real bone of contention. What had happened was that hitherto, I think for about the last 11 years or so, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, who are self-funding, so Federal Inland Revenue Service get 4% of what they collect as cost of collection. They don't get their salaries from the Federation account. And every year they allocate a bonus. And that bonus, part of that bonus was being given to staff of the Office of the Accountant General.
That's about 1%?
It's about 1%, Ministry of Finance and Budget Office of the Federation. And it's always been contentious, but it's always been paid. And in 2014, apparently, my predecessor, the then CME, had said, look, this is the last time it'll be paid. It was 800 million. It was communicated to the unions that it's not in your scheme of service. It's not... would I use the word official? It's not an official payment that can be justified. And so it's not going to continue. That was 2014. So when I was sworn in 2015, one of the first issues I was dealt with was this, and this year the claim was 1.2 billion. And I consulted, asked the head of service, asked the presidency, checked the legalities, and spoke to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. And no, there's no provision in the Federal Inland Revenue Service budget for it. There's no provision in our budget in the Ministry of Finance for it. It's a customary payment rather than an entitlement. And I began to engage with the leadership of the unions around this and explain to them that it wouldn't be possible. I think people are just disappointed because they've always had it. But where we are now, we put a budget together, and that budget guides what we can and can't pay. So any payment that is not in the budget cannot be made. And I, took time to explain that to the staff, that look, what you're legally entitled to, you will always get. And you shouldn't have to protest for that. But what, unfortunately, is not a legal entitlement, it's a customary entitlement, can't be paid. And I'm sure you remember some years ago, a minister actually got into some trouble around what was then called a customary, this is what we do. This is a new government. And we made it very clear that, unfortunately, this particular 1.2 billion payment can't be made because there is really nowhere to pay it from. And secondly, it's not an entitlement. It's not in the scheme of service. Other civil servants in other ministries don't get it. So it's to be discontinued.
Yeah, but they also said that they had written to you thrice, and then they didn't get any response, and so they had to just embark on that protest. Is that correct?
No. I'm sure they've written to me. But the response that perhaps they were expecting is not the response that I was able to give, which is that, this payment unfortunately can't be made. That was the real bone of contention. Other things are, we didn't get overtime in time. In some ministries, in some departments, say, well, we don't have enough working tools. Those are administrative issues, which the Permanent Secretary is doing a splendid job of sorting out. But the more fundamental issue was this payment.
Did you see the letter written to you by these union?
I get thousands of letters. I actually interface with the union quite closely, and they come to my office. We've been talking about this issue. So it's not an issue that we weren't engaging on. We have been talking about the difficulties and how difficult it's going to be to get this payment through. But I also accept it because they explained to me that, look, some of them have been looking forward to this money. They get it every year. So when it's abruptly unavailable. It's causing...
So it doesn't look like you got a letter from them.
The letter probably came into the ministry, but typically such letters are dealt with by the permanent secretary, because the civil service actually report to the permanent secretary. Remember, I'm the political head of the ministry. The permanent secretary is the administrative head, who would typically take care of those issues.
Because what happened was, to say the least, ugly, because a lot of Nigerians thought that if there had been a meeting between you and this union, we don't think we would have been seeing what we saw for 2 days. Perhaps an explanation which you just gave now, which is very clear, to say, hey, this thing has been stopped since 2014 based on this. Perhaps if you had that meeting with the unions, I don't think that they would have gone on that protest.
I disagree with that for 2 reasons. One, I did have many meetings with the leadership of the union, and I'm very familiar with them. I think the other thing to say about protest is, and I'm bracing myself, there's going to be a lot more protest.
In your ministry?
Generally. Because one of my jobs at the moment is to make unpopular decisions. And if you make a decision that people don't like, people have the right to vent their feelings. So I don't think we should be too shocked at protest, because people, if you make tough decisions, you must expect there to be a reaction. Now, the thing for me is, are they the right decisions? Are they well thought through? Can they be justified? And if they are, then unfortunately you have to be ready for that. And so, you may see a few more protests.
What was eventually agreed?
Nothing was agreed other than that their entitlements, as I said, those things they are legally entitled, they must get. And those things must be looked into, and the DFA, the Director of Finance and Admin, stood up and addressed those very issues there, and everybody went back to work.
So as far as you're concerned, this 1.2 billion naira special overtime allowance, they're not going to get that one?
It's not. It's been cancelled, as I said, since 2014. It's not in the scheme of service.
All right.
Of any civil servant. It's not an entitlement. And so, and 1.2 billion naira is not a small amount. It's a fairly significant amount of money. So it's not something that is hanging somewhere that we can afford to just, say, okay, because you're protesting, take. Then what happens next? What about other staff in other ministries that also have? But having said that, the staff work very hard, okay? So, and they work long hours. Sometimes we're in the office till 10, 11, 1 o'clock. And for those overtime that they actually do, they must be paid. They must be paid. The special overtime allowance, which is effectively taken from one agency, which is the IRS, and given to other staff, that's not a practice.
This is just one decision you've had to take, as you say, and you're talking about more stringent decisions you're going to have to take. Like, which ones are they?
Oh, there are many. There are many. I mean, by the nature of the job at the moment, I am cutting costs. I am taking people off the payroll. I am reviewing projects that we had committed to that perhaps are not sustainable. I am having to give people sometimes very bad news, which is, I'm sorry, there's no money for this. So if someone's expecting money, you expect them to have a reaction. I think the most important thing we're trying to do is, where we have those contentious issues, making sure that we engage. But even when you engage, there's still no guarantee that people won't decide.
Part of some of the things you've been quoted as, some of the statements you've made have had to do with fiscal discipline.
Yes.
And a lot of people will argue that it doesn't look like it's being efficiently put through, as you continue to say. What's your take?
When you mean that we're not engaging in fiscal discipline?
As much as you say you are.
Well, fiscal discipline for me is a process. It's a destination we must get to, and we're starting. And it's a daily process. So, for example, we have our efficiency unit. Now, they started with looking at things like travel, then they've moved on to food. Now I think they're looking at adverts. So it's a process of fiscal. It's not you don't, wake up one day and say, I'm disciplined. It's going through everything you're spending in a very careful manner, looking at it, evaluating, is this the right way to spend money? Are we getting value for money? So I think fiscal discipline for me is a destination.
But where are we on break?
No, go ahead.
Where exactly, when you say fiscal, yes, they're looking at the efficiency is looking at cutting down cost of travel and all of those things. But where are you implementing it? On whose side? Is it the lower cadre of those in public service, or is it affecting all those?
Everybody. It's affecting everybody, and it must affect everybody. From the top to the bottom, it affects everybody. Otherwise, it's not fair.
Because why I'm asking that is because we've read in the papers today about 15 states that are going bankrupt.
Okay.
And are they also applying this fiscal discipline as you're applying at the federal level?
Right.
And are you engaging the commissioners of finance in the states so that they can buy into this as well?
Okay. So what we've put together is what we've called the Fiscal Sustainability Plan, the FSP. And what that is almost a contract, for want of a better description, between the states and the federal government around moving on this journey towards fiscal discipline. What the FSP does is it has 22 points of reform, and those reforms will move states along this line towards fiscal discipline. So it's everything from publish your accounts, publish your budget performance, publish your budget, obtain a credit rating, improve your internally generated revenue, cut your costs. I'm sure you're seeing now a lot of work around I hate the term ghost workers, by the way, but payroll cleanup. You're seeing every state is doing it. That's one of the points on the Fiscal Sustainability Plan. So what we're trying to do is replicate these reforms at federal government down into state and local government, because we recognise that us just doing it at federal level will not make the difference. So we're doing it at federal level. The Secretary to the Government of the Federation issues circulars to the boards and corporations. So when we said, for example, no first-class travel, business class for this chief executive and chairman only, that went down to every single board and corporation, and it's being enforced. So that discipline is travelling downwards, and the Fiscal Sustainability Plan is part of that for the state and local government.
Was this applicable the first time out when the states got... it was also budget support fund, was it? Because we called it bailout at the time.
I think bailout's the wrong word. No. And I think, yes, that money was given to clear, I think, arrears of salaries, and there were no conditions attached. And we feel now, with what we now know and where the country is, that there needs to be condition attached to financial support, which is what the budget support plan is. That's what the state governors have agreed to, that the money is dispersed monthly, subject to the attainment of certain milestones. And there's a monitoring and evaluation process being provided by independent accounting firms who will go. So if a state, for example, says that by December I would have published all my accounts, if by December they haven't published their accounts, then they cannot get any support under the program.
Even though they agreed to those terms?
Yes, because it's their own plan. We've asked them, these are the objectives. You tell us how and when you're going to achieve them. It's over about an 18-month period. All these reforms have to take place. Some are due now, some are due within a month, some are due within 3 months, some are due within 6 months. So it's a reform program. So when I keep reading that some states have complied, I think that's a misunderstanding. No state could have complied, because it's going to take about 18 months for all these reforms to feed through. But when they're fed through, what should happen is we should have much, much leaner, much more efficient and much more transparent state government, which I think is very important for the whole nation.
All right, we'll take a quick break, but we'll come back and continue on what the situation is with the states, and then focus a little more on that report which speaks about them going bankrupt. Join us again.